did my video about the Jinx trial deck that was available to play at the Project K demo recently at the TFT Open in Macau. This time I'm going to talk all about the Unforgiven Yasuo. People are just now starting to experiment with deck building since we have some new tools available to us as the Project K community. Speaking of which, if you're not already a part of it, please come join the Project K community Discord, which I'll leave linked in the description. And if you have access to Tabletop Simulator, we have a mod that features all of those trial decks. Let's focus back on Yasuo. Yasuo Unforgiven is all about cheating out movement, either score multiple points in a single turn, or to keep high-value targets safe by pushing them into a battlefield and then pulling them back with his ability. First, going over the big payoff cards, we have the Yasuo Champion card and the Kayn Champion card. Each of these kind of do different things, but with various forms of movement cheating, we can get different things done with this character. Yasuo is a bit more efficient at controlling the board, where Kayn is a bit more efficient at scoring multiple points. However, they can both do either of those jobs. Kayn does require more setup than Yasuo, though I would say his ceiling is a bit higher because he has ganking to help cheat out movement that Yasuo natively doesn't have, but to trigger his effect requires a bit more work. Honestly, I keep going back and forth on which one is my favorite, but I can say with certainty for a while that I thought Kayn was significantly worse than Yasuo, but I no longer think that's the case. I think Kayn is up there in the Yasuo deck as a key player that is probably not getting cut anytime soon. Moving into the engine's core support. Honestly, Last Breath is such a huge deal for both of these units, or champions, or whatever you want to call them. Being able to re-ready your unit, meaning it has access to another movement for the turn, in addition to also dealing damage equal to its might to any enemy at a battlefield. Honestly, the biggest restriction on this card is the fact that it has to be a unit at a battlefield. I can't tell you how many times I've gone ahead and tried to cast this on someone who isn't at a battlefield, and then someone had to remind me at the table, like, hey, that doesn't target something in the base, and I'll be like, huh, you're right, it doesn't do that. Why didn't I remember that? I don't know what it is about Last Breath, but something intuitively to me makes me feel like I should be able to use it on things at the base. The card is just doing so much. It's a removal spell, it's a re-ready, it can help you single target something down. Usually Yasuo's whole gimmick is that he's able to deal damage to someone before combat starts, meaning that he's able to fight things without any risk. But sometimes something is a bit too big for Yasuo to go over the top of, and Last Breath lets him cheat his way into that fight because he gets to deal the 6 damage, and then before the opponent gets a chance to heal it up, you push the Yasuo again, attacking for another 6 damage from his primary skill, and all of that's made possible by Last Breath. Madden Marauder is a huge part of cheating out movement as well. This is another one of those cards that I think will probably be core to the deck. A quick gameplay tip for you if you're new to playing Yasuo. A lot of people will read this card for the first time and think the best piece of utility for it is to push an enemy off of a base, or sorry, off of a battlefield. But really the best way to use this card is to move one of your units off of a battlefield back to your base to protect them, or to be able to cheat out an additional proc of movement, like let's say something like Kayn, which wants to move multiple times a turn, or Yasuo to get off multiple attacks in a single turn. Another big part about this card that I seem to always forget when playing Yasuo is that it has tank. So you can push it with Yasuo and protect Yasuo even if he's not going to go over the top of something. I always forget this card has tank. Windswept Hillock is another way for us getting access to ganking. That can be really useful for Yasuo. It's a bit overkill on Kayn because obviously Kayn already has access to ganking, but if we can cheat it onto Yasuo, it's great. I will say ganking is a bit awkward to take advantage of as the Yasuo player without access to some other way of cheating movement, because if we exhaust to move to Windswept Hillock, obviously we can't actually use the ganking that turn, so typically we'll be using our legend ability to push the Yasuo into the battlefield and then exhausting Yasuo to move him from Windswept Hillock onto another battlefield, trying to score multiple times in a single turn. But if we go through all of that effort, we won't be able to bring Yasuo back to our base to protect him from any standard forms of combat. So it does feel a bit risky to go for certain combos with Windswept, but when the situation arises, it can feel really strong. Reaver's Row, on the other hand, is a very safe battlefield for Yasuo to be battling at because he can always just use the defend ability to retreat away. I often find myself really excited when Reaver's Row's on the battlefield because I will just continually throw Yasuo at it. Sure, our opponent can use it to protect themselves, but at least I can be proactive with Yasuo, putting him on a battlefield and then just retreating back. One of the things that the Yasuo deck really frequently does is just have a single unit that's fighting for them, and Reaver's Row is a fantastic battlefield to be fighting at when you just have a single unit, because you can always retreat to safety, where other people who aren't Yasuo and people who aren't Volibear often want to put multiple units on the battlefield, and if they're putting multiple units on Reaver's Row, they can only move back a small percentage of their fighting force, where if we're fighting with just one unit, like we will often be doing with Yasuo, we can move back 100% of our fighting force, basically protecting it for the next turn rotation. Moving on to some filler units that are in the deck, I think Wielder of Water is a fantastic unit in the deck because Yasuo wants to get online as quickly as possible, and a lot of other cheap cards that you could potentially be playing in the same slot as Wielder of Water, they're going to end up costing you some type of rune recycling, and rune recycling in the early stages of the game as Yasuo feels really bad because you're just getting one step further away from being able to play that Yasuo efficiently, especially if you want to take advantage of a piece of movement on that turn. Also, for whatever it's worth, Wielder of Water is just really stat efficient at 3-4, or what is effectively 3-4 for our deck. It'll frequently kill things that the opponent is playing on a similar turn, and then also survive, and the opponent's probably going to have to spend a resource or two to be able to deal with the Wielder of Water, or else you're going to start acquiring points faster than they would like you to be. I used to think Stealthy Pursuer was like super cracked, super broken, but she's by no means as anywhere near as powerful as I initially thought. Don't get me wrong, she's still really strong. I still think she's good in the deck, though I will say she is pretty expensive. Playing her on turn 2 means you can't play Yasuo on turn 3, which feels pretty unfortunate, but if you've got the curve for it and it works, it's just you got to be really careful about when you choose to play this card and when not to play this card. You got to really think about what your next turn looks like before you commit to playing a Stealthy Pursuer, especially in this Yasuo deck, which is all about timing, getting your Yasuo down quickly, or at the very least getting a Kayn down. If Stealthy Pursuer is going to be stopping you from doing that or delaying you from doing that for an entire turn, then she's probably not worth playing. That makes me fear for Stealthy Pursuer's future in this deck. It's possible that once we have access to the full card pool, it's just something else we would prefer to be playing in that slot, something that's not going to be recycling a rune. But only time will tell. We've got a couple combat tricks, starting off with On Guard. I mean, what is there to say? It's just a combat trick. It's a pretty good combat trick at that. It's only 1 cost to get +2, and not for nothing, it combos with the Last Breath spell that we went over earlier in this video that works really well with Yasuo. And even just giving Yasuo +2 attack can be a huge difference, because once we give Yasuo +2 attack, he'll be able to use his ability with +2 attack, because of course his ability doesn't just read deal 6 damage, it reads deal damage equal to his might, so you can take advantage. So On Guard buffing that up feels very good when you're trying to get over the top of a unit that Yasuo would typically struggle with. Discipline is also a combat trick. I will say I think it's a little bit worse than On Guard. Yes, it draws a card, and yes, it doesn't come with the requirement of only controlling one unit the same way that On Guard does. Oh, wait, speaking of which, before I continue back with Discipline, On Guard actually has a misprint. On Guard is supposed to be until end of turn, but there's just an error on the card. They'll go back and fix it. Don't worry. There's a reason these cards say sample. Jumping back over to Discipline, I think Discipline's significantly less flexible than On Guard. Yes, it draws a card, but it does require you to leave 2 mana up as opposed to 1 mana. I gotta stop saying mana, it's energy. It forces you to keep up 2 energy if you want to use it as a combat trick. Obviously, you don't have to use it as a combat trick. You could do something like Discipline and Last Breath on your turn to be able to do +2 damage. But there's something a bit more suspicious about leaving up 2 energy than there is leaving up 1 energy. I think most people at the table, if they see you end your turn with 1 energy up, they won't think much of it. But if you leave your turn with 2 energy up, that's a bit more eyebrow raising, right? People are going to look at that a little bit differently. So I think they're probably less likely to step in whatever traps you've laid. Defy is a counterspell that only hits 4 cost or less things. It also has the restriction of not being able to target things that have multiple rune costs, only 1 rune cost, meaning Defy can't counter some really high impact spells like Rebuke, for example. It can't target. It can't target Grand Stratagem, Possession, Unchecked Power, all fantastic spells, and Defy misses them all. But there are definitely plenty of meaningful spells within its range, like Siphon Power, Super Mega Death Rocket, and both of the combat tricks. Because of that and more, it's definitely the case that Defy is good, and you'll see it get played a lot, and the times that it is played, it's going to be making a big impact, but it's definitely restricted, but I think it's restricted for a good reason. I do think this is a really good design. It gives them a lot of triggers. If they want to make a really expensive spell, they know, hey, it can't be affected by Defy, and if they make a cheaper spell that potentially could be affected by Defy, giving it +1 rune cost is kind of like, not actually, but it's kind of like a buff in the sense that now it can't be targeted by Defy. So I really love that it gives them multiple levers to pull when looking at future design space for spells and whether or not it is targetable by Defy. Windwall, on the other hand, is a significantly more expensive counterspell, but now it can target anything. It's going to be inefficient at targeting those cheaper spells that Defy can deal with, but it's totally worth the trade-off that yes, it can indeed now target things like Possession, right? You can counter a Possession, which is a huge deal. The only problem is you need quite a bit of foresight that you can use your Windwall, and the opponent needs to play into it, right? If they see you float 3 energy they know you can cast a wind wall, and they just kind of have to risk it. Meditation lets you draw a card, and then if you have a unit to exhaust, draw an additional card, which is pretty cool. This is a really flexible tool in the early stages of the game, because honestly, Yasuo is not really doing much for the first 2 turns unless they find a wielder of water, and even still, they probably aren't playing that on their first turn unless they're going last. So typically you're going to find room to play Meditation. I will say exactly in the middle game, it feels really awkward to spend, because generally you're going to be wanting to spend at least 2 during your turn for your Legend's ability to try and keep your champion Yasuo safe, or you're going to want to use something like Last Breath, or one of your other various things that you want to be spending mana on, like or energy on, I should say, like a Madden Marauder or something like that. And it's really hard to weave in a meditation in that kind of middle stage of the game. But towards the later stage of the game and the early stage of the game, meditation just feels like free card cycling. I definitely wouldn't say keep meditation in your opening hand or anything like that, but you'll find a way to play it during your game, and because it replaces itself at the very least, it feels pretty decent. It just feels like a solid card. You're never like sad to see meditation in your hand, I don't think. Rebuke, it's got a lot of people talking. A lot of people talking about Rebuke. Some people saying it's a really, really broken card, like it's the best card in the set, and I do think it's an extremely strong card, especially against Volibear players who take a while to set up and then they just get got by a Rebuke. The fact that it dodges Defy because it has a 2 recycle cost is kind of crazy, and it's a really important piece of removal. Try to hold on to your Rebukes when you're versing Volibear players, because if they jam like a big 10 cost card, sure, especially if it has like Deflect or something, sure, you're going to have to put back 4 runes, but you're going to delay them a whole turn. It took them their entire turn to put down that thing, and now they're going to have to replay it next turn. Sure, you lose a few runes, but the tempo advantage has got to be worth it. And lastly, we have Targon's Peak, which didn't really fit anywhere else in my video. It's also a stealthy way to set up runes for the next turn rotation. People are going to look at you suspiciously if you leave up enough runes going into the next turn rotation, because they're going to think like, oh, maybe they have a wind wall, maybe they have a discipline, maybe they have something that they're trying to set up. But if you conquer Targon's Peak and you do it in a way that isn't, you're not like going out of your way to do it, you just like touch Targon's Peak to get it and then rotate out or something like that, it looks like you're just picking up the score. And some people won't think twice about the fact that, well, now he has 3 energy up, because they're just going to think, well, of course he has 3 energy up. He triggered Targon's Peak, right? There was no way for him to spend that energy in the first place. I do want to mention the filler cards of the deck now. I want to mention Seal of Calm, Clockwork Keeper, Cemetery Attendant, and Misfortune, all of which I think are pretty much bloat in the deck. Don't get me wrong, I think some of these cards, if not all of these cards, are actually relatively good cards. I just don't think they have a home in like a super optimized Yasuo list. So if you do decide to start deck building, these are the 4 cards that I would look at cutting. Or at least these are the first 4 cards I would look at cutting. As for cards I would consider running in the deck, I would consider running Possession and Gust, as they can both be really powerful swingy cards. Possession has the ability to just entirely swing the game when using it against a Volibear player, and Gust is a fantastic tempo swing in the early stages of the game. I think that's everything I have to say about Yasuo and his trial deck coming out of Macau. Let me know which of the 2 remaining champions you want me to cover next, whether it should be Victor or whether it should be Volibear. Thank you so much for watching, keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.